You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
What a beautiful day for horses in the morning.
You are listening to the #1 horse podcast in the world. Here's your entertaining look at the horse world and the people in it.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Allison Marshall.
And I'm Dr. John Langlois.
And you are listening to the special monthly Chi University episode of Horses in the Morning on the Horse Radio Network for May 28th, 2024. Good morning, Horse World.
Welcome to our once-a-month look at traditional Chinese veterinary medicine with the Chi University.
Good morning, everyone. How are you, John? How's it going today?
It's going good. It's a beautiful day in North Florida, although it's starting to get hotter.
Yeah, wow. Here in Virginia, we've had kind of cool, rainy spring, and a week ago, it just dropped into 85 with all this rain, and it has been muggy. So we are kind of sweating it out up here. We didn't have much of our nice long spring that I've been very spoiled by.
Well, send some rain our way because we've had less than a half inch in a month, so we could share a little bit.
Oh wow, we're not swampy like we were in February, but we're pretty rainy. All of my horsey people up here. So today on our show, listeners, John and I have taken a little bit of a soiree. We figured that every horse person comes with a dog. So we got the opportunity to interview Dr. Greg Todd, who is our lead TA practitioner at the Chi University for the small animal, for the dogs and cats. So he is the organizer of all of the dog teachers. And Greg and I have been friends since I took one of his he sat next to me during an herbal class, and then I took one of his herbal classes, and this is like, I would say 2007 or 8-ish. And I think that Greg is one of the neatest TCVM practitioners. He's got an amazing philosophy. He comes at Chinese medicine almost from the human perspective. Greg is a martial artist, and I think through the martial arts is yet another view of the 5-element theory and the theories of balance that we strive for when we're treating our animal patients. So I'm excited to talk to Greg today about dog stuff. How about you?
Me too. Greg is world renowned actually for his efforts in TCVM, both in publications and in teaching. So we're very special to have him on today.
For sure, we are in the presence of royalty. So welcome, welcome, Greg and John.
Thanks, and welcome to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Hi, guys. How are you?
We're wonderful, thank you. We're so glad you're here today.
I would say that's a glowing introduction that might be somewhat overstated, but I am happy to be here and share my experiences with you guys.
Modesty is one of your wonderful traits, Greg. I know this. So tell us a little bit about kind of what got you started. What brought you from the horse world, or what is your tangential horse world, and how do you use your TCVM and all that sort of thing?
Sure. So I actually went to school with every intention of being an equine veterinarian, and I had worked in an equine practice along that journey for about 5 years. I had become a horse shoer, although I was a much better horse trimmer. And in my senior year, I found myself enamored with the mystery of medicine. At that time, in the 80s, there was much more medical capabilities to pursue diagnostics in small animals, and I made the jump my senior year into small animal medicine. So I wound up going back to the first practice I ever worked in and becoming an associate. And after that, I became a partner and then an owner, and now I'm happily back to being an associate again. I practiced 36 years in the same practice.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. About 4 years ago now. So yeah. My journey into Chinese medicine was a little different. I started as a patient, but I was a reluctant patient. I remember very clearly going up the stairs to be treated for the first time. Yes, I was a runner and I had a back injury, and I tried everything I could to get my back better, and I couldn't get it better. And everyone in my area kept saying to me, "You need to go see this Dr. Patrick Sullivan. He'll fix you up. You need to go see this guy named Patrick Sullivan. He'll fix you up." And I'm like, I'm not going to see anybody poking me with needles. I'll sort it out. And I couldn't. So I was about 30 years old, and I was going to my first appointment, and I walked up the stairs, and I remember saying to myself, I'm 30 years old, I'm fairly well educated, and I'm going to see a witch doctor. Okay. So I got in, and Patrick, who became my first teacher, was a very enlightened man. He's the most balanced fire person you'll ever meet. And in fact, many of my clients tell me they feel better just being in his presence. And I walked in, and he looked at my face, and he asked me a few questions about, what my complaint was. And he looked at me and he said, you're very metal. He said, you're very ordered. And I'm like, as I thought about my razors being lined up in the drawer at home, I said, I don't know what you mean. I can be spontaneous. He goes, you mind if I take your pulse? And I said, okay, thinking, okay, well, count away. And he took my left wrist and he felt for a few minutes and said, He took my right wrist and he felt for a few minutes and said, And then he looked at me and proceeded to tell me things that no one should know about you, having only known you for 5 minutes. And I'm like, give me my arm back. And he looked at me then and said, would you like me to treat you now? And I'm like, yes, I think that would be good, because I don't know what to say at this particular moment. I mean, when someone tells you what time you're waking up and what you're dreaming, how you feel after 2 bites of food, where you're tight, where your pain is, you kind of go, well, I think I want to know more. And that was Patrick. So he treated me. We went through my back issues. He was the witch doctor I was looking for. This was in 1992.
That's really cool.
Actually, yes, 92. And he eventually, I had a paralyzed cat named Flannel that people couldn't afford to have a myelogram because that was before MRIs. And I thought, well, geez, nothing else will work. So I called Patrick and said, gee, wouldn't it be fun if you came down and treated this cat for free? And I'll knock it out, because surely you can't put needles in a cat. And he said, sure. And I said, oh, by the way, we'll have to do it after work. And he was working like 12 or 13-hour days at the time. But he came down and treated the cat for free. Treated the cat 4 times. After the second time, the cat was running around the cage. And I said, okay, I need you to teach me how to do this. So I became Patrick's student. He gave me written tests and textbooks I had to read. We had long conversations, and I began to see patients in the clinic with him. And eventually I went on and became certified by IVIS. And then in the late 90s, Dr. Shea came. And once I sat in Dr. Shea's lectures and listened to him talk, I knew he was the veterinary teacher I had waited for. And I became a big fan and a student, and then became a TA and lecturer, and to where we all are now. You and Don can relate to that kind of story because you have similar experiences, I know.
Yes. Sure. Yes, for sure. It's all about that first experience and seeing how powerful it was to really appreciate and make that shift or change to go after it.
Without a doubt. And I was blessed because Patrick Sullivan, who lives now in Wisconsin, was an amazing teacher. He had been a teacher. He had studied in Korea. He'd been a teacher at a local acupuncture school, and then was just totally focused on practicing. But he was an amazing teacher, and I hear his voice in my head every day as I practice. And he taught me the ideas that there's just one medicine, and when you look at things from the left, like a traditional Chinese veterinary medicine way, and you look at things from right as in a conventional perspective, they should always agree. And that made me want to go about building a bridge between the two medicines and really becoming a truly integrative practitioner, recognizing that a great deal of the healing that we need to do must incorporate some form of traditional medicine to actually be achieved.
And that was
So-
my experience with Dr. Shea too, was that I just realized that he was a bridge. And I think that in the Western medicine realm, at least my experience was that we sort of get taught that this is the only way of doing things, and to find someone that says yes and instead of but was really, it's just what a
Exactly right.
gift, right? What a gift.
Well, the first time I listened to Dr. Shea lecture, Lisa was actually his intern at the time.
Oh, nice.
And it was at a FVMA meeting, a Florida Veterinary Medical Association meeting. And he lectured for, 4 or 5 hours, and I sat in all of them and hammered him with every question I could think of, because I'm like, this man knows the answers. This man knows the answers. And then I asked him to dinner, and I peppered him with more questions. And then I took my first herbal course, and then from there, I just haven't looked back, and he continues to answer questions for me on a routine basis. So I'm blessed.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing how amenable he is to answer questions. And, how lucky are you to get dinner with the master like that? Those are special times. I don't have to tell you.
For sure, without a doubt. Yes, and it was just a real blessing. And he was just so giving and so open and so incredibly brilliant. It was just a night I'll never forget.
And remains so, just remains so.
Yes.
Hey, so Greg, I remember years ago, I think maybe before you actually sold your practice, that your practice over in Dunedin would have 3, 4, 5 acupuncturists and seeing quite a number of cases a day. It was pretty intense practice. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So actually now we actually have presently 8 veterinarians. 3 of us old guys are not there all the time, but we have 3 other veterinarians starting in June that will be full-time. June and July will be full-time. Of those, we have 5 veterinarians who are trained in Chinese veterinary medicine, 3 of which teach or have taught acupuncture at Chi University. I mean, Jackie Olson, Mike Bartholomew, and myself. And then additionally, we have a board certified veterinary internist who comes to our practice twice a week and does internal medicine consults and ultrasounds. And she also is a Chi University graduate in acupuncture and some herbs. And matter of fact, she was co-author. Ironically, I know at some point we're going to talk about Cushings, and she was co-author with Dr. Shea and Ron Coe on a paper published in JAVMA about Cushings a couple years ago, which I took the liberty of opening up so that we could have it if we wanted to talk about it.
That's fabulous.
So that really is. It was a perfect environment to learn more and more, both from a conventional standpoint and a Chinese medical standpoint, because we just, as you guys know, when you're in that environment with other really gifted practitioners, or an environment with really gifted practitioners that bounce things off of you and each other, we have conversations, and inevitably we learn from each other and grow and do more and more. And so that's been very helpful. And of course, until just recently, I had Patrick a phone call away. If I was like, I'm seeing this, but I can't make it fit with that. And Patrick go, oh, well, go back and feel again. So
Yes,
that
that's
was probably
very cool.
another one of the great gifts I had. Yeah. I would see patients with Patrick, and he's a master of pulse diagnosis. And he would go, okay, you pulse this side, I'll pulse that side. Then we'd switch, and he would say, okay, what'd you feel? And I would tell him, and he'd say, okay, go back and feel again. You're not quite there. And then we would have long conversations about that as well.
It's really amazing. That's one thing that I find as an equine practitioner throughout my almost 3 decades of practice is that, I'm not lonely because I like being in the truck by myself and being able to think, but there are less people to consult in one's life as an equine practitioner. It's pretty much on the phone. We don't have a lot of those options. So
yeah,
it's pretty awesome that you have that.
For sure. Absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, tell us, if you were to summarize probably the top 5 things that you would see in dogs in 1 month's time, what would those be that you would treat with TCVM? What are your top 5? Oh, I can't wait for this to walk in my door because I know I'm going to do it some good.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that the things that we treat with Chinese medicine are basically most things, starting. But if I were to give you the top cases presenting with a complaint, you would start with the most common presentation from a Chinese medical perspective is you get the older dog that's having trouble moving around. So we get, to quote it in a conventional sense, you're going to get arthritis, intervertebral disc disease, knee, stifle disease. Those are very common. We get a lot of skin dogs. That's another very common presentation. Because we've done this for so long and we're so entrenched in the community, I mean, I literally practiced a quarter mile from the high school that I graduated from. And because the practice has been here and we've been doing Chinese medicine for several decades here, we have a strong bond with a lot of the local specialists. So we get a lot of oncology cases because oncologists will work with us. And then we get a lot of endocrine cases, and a lot of inflammatory bowel diseases and GI problems and chronic pancreatitis. That's probably the top of the list, and the other aspect of this, embracing the idea that this is truly an integrative medicine. Now we have, there are people that we have had generation after generation of dogs together. So the way my practice is set up, once you've embraced that idea of being an integrative client, when your patient comes in, we pick from tool chests that are appropriate. And what that means is we will start when they're puppies and do preventative things and balance them out. The idea of balancing yin and yang to ensure that there's that yin and yang imbalance is the equivalent of an unimpaired homeostasis, that everything's working the way it should be. And so we start that as puppies, and we intercede with different foods, or we intercede with an herb, or with a needle, or with an exercise, or even some tuina. And we start that when they're young, and that means when they hit the middle age and older ages, when we would normally see these things, we see them less. And that's not to say that that's true of everyone, because there are varying amounts of Jing and varying amounts of owner compliance and other things that go into, and sometimes just bad luck that things pop up, but we see them do better.
Greg, on an earlier podcast, we did kind of a segment called How, When, and Why Would I Contact a TCVM Practitioner? And the why was kind of like, well, anything and everything can be treated with TCVM. And so when it comes in your door and you see, certainly if it's a fracture, you got to fix the fracture. But post-op, you can do your TCVM. So for me, it's sure. All things can be treated with TCVM. So are there a couple things that when they come in the door, you say, well, these are going to be challenging. This particular thing that I see, I'm still going to go after it, but it's going to be challenging for us.
Without a doubt. I mean, the things that are obvious challenges are going to be someone who has cancer, right? You have really fulminating lymphoma, or you've got hemangiosarcoma, or even transitional cell carcinoma, bladder tumors. Those are all things that we can treat, and we can improve the quality of life. And in some cases, we can actually extend life tremendously. But those are challenges where you go, okay, I'm going to make them feel better and I'm going to do my best. But as far as if your goal is for this to be cured, that may or may not happen. It's certainly, that's true with some things that are harder to manage. You've got a diabetic patient. Bringing Chinese medicine into a dog with diabetes is very helpful. But unlike cats, dogs seldom go into remission. Dogs are more like a type 1 diabetic. And so once they've required insulin, the idea that you're going to get them so they don't need insulin again almost never happens. But you can certainly regulate them and make them better and help them enjoy a longer and better quality of life.
Great.
Yeah, that's super. So do you see any farm dogs in your practice? Do you see dogs that...
Sure.
Yeah, nice. Do you see anything different in your farm dogs than you do in your regular dogs?
Ironically, I would say I see somewhat less arthritis, but it's not. I would say that there's still a high frequency of arthritis as they get to a certain age, or high incidence of arthritis when they get to a certain age. However, their ability to cope with it and their muscle tone and their overall fitness is better, so they can deal with it better than the dog who sits on the couch all day.
That makes a lot of sense.
I have some issues where dogs on the farm, maybe they're, for instance, the average Labrador going out, oh, I'm going to go over here and eat half this pile of shavings for no good reason. Okay, well, that's not a good thing. But so we see some things like that. I say that I have to be more cautious about my farm dogs in looking to make sure that they don't have some sort of toxicity, that they haven't ingested something like rat poison or something that's been found in the field. Those are problems that I've run into in the past. But as far as metabolic disease, there's so much that goes into the origin of metabolic disease for dogs. I think that it's probably fair to say that you will see less metabolic disease in these dogs, in the farm dogs, than other dogs, because they are classically fitter. They're going to move around more. They have the ability to be free. So Dr. Shea had a saying, that all day long, dog's in jail. The only time he's not in jail is when his owner takes him for a walk. Well, for a farm dog, that's not necessarily true. And that ability to enrich themselves is huge, just like people, right? If you're stuck in a cubicle all day, or you can walk out and smell the flowers, huge difference from A to B. And that's true for dogs as well. Having said that, there's still these incidences of metabolic disease. And right now I have a great dog, and I won't give you his name, but he's a 13-year-old terrier mix, and he's got a bum knee, and we've kept him from going into Cushings, but he still has ongoing issues with liver values and things like that we're managing with Chinese medicine. And that's those are things that you would say, okay, well, I can see that in any dog, but he's doing really well with it. He still goes out and follows mom around when she's out giving lessons, and the barn help around when they're cleaning stalls. He's a happy man.
So with respect to the metabolic dogs, do you find, as you were a regular practitioner earlier on and a TCVM practitioner exclusively now, do you feel like when a metabolic case presents to you that you feel you're going to do the best job with TCVM, meaning that, and Dr. Shea used to say that, there are things that we are very strong at, and there are things that Western medicine are very strong at, but TCVM for metabolic disease is very strong. Absolutely.
And just to be clear, I'm still an integrated practitioner. I still will use conventional tools. I still do surgery. But I would say the predominance of my caseload is either treating patients that are cases that are highly involved in an internal medicine case where they're seeing an internal medicine specialist or an oncologist, and they're getting Chinese medicine as well, or patients that I've raised from the time that they're puppies, or third generation clients. I actually have some third generation clients that come into my practice. Oh, I remember when I would come in with my grandfather. Okay. So,
and like that to make you feel old.
Yeah, that'll do it right there. I guarantee it.
I'm feeling that one.
So, but I would say, I think my attitude about integrative medicine is pretty much a blend of two things. One is something that Dr. Shea taught me, and one is what Patrick taught me. And Dr. Shea always taught me, he always says, conventional medicine is really good at telling you where the problem is. It'll help you perfect your diagnosis. And I think that's absolutely true. But if we're talking about something other than acute disease, you're going to find me going, let's try some Chinese medicine, because that's going to give us the best ability to correct the root imbalance and help your pathophysiology work best, right?
So in that consideration for Cushing's, from a Western perspective, Cushing's is a disease for the most part, at least in the horse, of a pituitary tumor, and mostly in the dog, a pituitary tumor. So the treatment is take out the tumor.
Well, in the dog, we don't take out the pituitary tumor.
I know, and I say this because I worked several years with Dan Sharp doing some research where we do remove the pituitary gland for seasonality in the mares, 4 to 6 hours of surgery. That's not an option for the dog or the horse.
No. Now, in the dog, they make a distinction between two types of pituitary tumors. There's a pituitary microadenoma, they call it, which is the most common presentation of older dogs with Cushing's, and they call it a pituitary macroadenoma, which is the pituitary microadenoma. It doesn't really behave like a brain tumor in that it keeps growing and growing and growing and causes a ton of problems from the tumor. The problems that it causes are really related to the fact that it's telling the adrenal glands to make more cortisol. The macroadenoma, on the other hand, and these are very rare. I think in all my time as a veterinarian, I've only seen 3 of them. They continue to grow, and they can actually cause some problems as a tumor. Right. And so I've had people. There are some neurologists that will actually, and neurosurgeons that will actually try to go in and take those out if they feel that that's the only shot that the dog has. But that's, as you pointed out, not highly successful. So if you can picture in your head the idea that the brain is almost like 2 kidney beans pushed together. If you go in through the top, you got to go all the way from the top to the bottom where you see the stem attaches. And if you could be right in between those 2 stems, it's going to live right down in that area, not about 3/4 of the way down to be removed. So it's not easy to get to. I would say that, John, I worked with Dan Sharp when I was in veterinary school. I worked every summer in his reproductive department, and so I've actually helped him cannulate the pituitary to sample from mares when we were trying to work on seasonality. So I've sat in those surgeries, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. It is quite a daunting undertaking.
Yeah, and you would never recommend that for a pony or a horse to go through.
No, and I would not recommend it generally for a dog either. But there are some. It would be the therapy of last resort, if at all, and it would never be with a macroadenoma because it just doesn't work that way.
So when we look,
sometimes
go ahead.
I just wanted to be clear. In the dogs, sometimes they can actually have true adrenal tumors on their adrenal glands. Right. And so in those cases, adrenalectomies, depending on which adrenal gland it is and how big the tumor is, those can be really helpful, but we don't usually default to that unless we're concerned that there can be a benign mass on your adrenal or a malignant mass on your adrenal. And we don't usually default to that unless we're concerned that it might be a malignant mass. And we usually determine that by ultrasounding them a few times and following it along and seeing how the dog's doing. Much easier than the pituitary for sure. Although, if you look at where that right kidney sits in the dog, it's tucked up in such a way that getting the right adrenal gland out is sometimes a daunting prospect. So that's why, especially if there's a malignant tumor there. So that's why imaging is your friend if that's got to happen.
So when we see these cases,
I didn't mean to derail us.
Yeah, no. But when we see these cases of metabolic issues in the dog or the horse, when I see them, I feel very, very positive in that, our approach is going to be not to just address the pituitary, it's to address the whole body, to put the body in balance. And that's where TCVM, for me, is just so magical because we have, we have a way to use a number of different options of acupuncture and herbal and Tuina and food therapy, which is a really important thing for managing these cases. And rather than just using a pharmaceutical medicine to address the tumor, we have a much better approach, which is holistic, and oftentimes integrative, but it really does allow us to hone in on balancing the animal as opposed to treating a symptom.
And we're not biased at
I
all
would agree.
in saying that's the best approach.
No.
Mhm.
Right.
It is, of course, the best
Well,
approach.
and I would say that, in fact, I'm not necessarily biased except by my experience. So when I first started treating Cushing's dogs, it was before there were drugs like Veteril or Trilostane. We treated everyone with Lysodren, and that was a challenge of and of itself. And this was before I started doing Chinese medicine. And after Trilostane, that's safe. That perhaps is a safer option, although it has its own shortcomings than Lysodren, but it's still a challenge. And what I've discovered when I would start treating these dogs that were taking these conventional medications, and I would start trying to add in Chinese medicine, I always felt like the medication was creating extra things for me to fix.
Right.
So actually now, when we find these dogs, I try to get mom and dad to commit to at least 3 months of Chinese medicine therapy before we introduce any kind of conventional medicine. And even more with the advanced diagnostics we have now, I see these dogs that everything is pointing, their tongue, their pulse, their presenting signs, and their conventional lab work, short of crossing the line on the blood test we do for Cushing's in dogs. They're not on the Cushing side yet, but they're headed that way in a big hurry. And if I can catch them right there, many times, I can't give you a percentage without being a feels like, but I would say more than half of the time I can keep them from going to that Cushing sign, and really more like 80+%.
So if you have a case that comes in, like even on that early side, are you going to integrate and say to the client that I would love to do some blood tests? Let's see what the levels are. I get this a lot as an equine practitioner, should we test and know where it is? And there's a whole discussion about that, some of the controversies of the testing, whether it be, seasoned or, there's going to be horses that, from my experience, that have high levels and no clinical signs. And then there's others that have hardly any clinical signs and their levels are high. So do you recommend to integrate the blood testing with most of your cases of metabolic problems?
I do, because I think that information is always your ally. And so I think back to what you're saying, you have to integrate it as a whole, right? But it's a signpost that says, I think this is where we are. And I have had cases. I had one dog. This dog had a gene deficiency, which for the listeners, yeah. So if you can imagine that your body lives on fuel all through your life. When you're born, you're given this super concentrated jet rocket fuel that your body's stored on, and it's your battery. This is what you use. And when this is used up, you're going to leave this planet. Okay. And we replenish that every day with the food we eat and the way we live by taking food essence to combine with that pre-heaven essence so that we live our lives. But based on, and that jing, if you will, that pre-heaven jing or pre-heaven essence is dictated a lot by both your genetics, but also by your congenital environment. Like, you're born with what you got and what it looks like as you go through life. So probably the most classic example of a gene deficiency in a dog is going to be a dog with hip dysplasia. And that dog may live a long and happy life, but the way that his gene came together, those hips are just not formed right, and that's a gene problem. But I had this little dog who was a little Maltese, and she had problems on multiple levels, not the least of which she was very early on, at less than a year of age, she was diagnosed as having Maltese encephalitis, which is usually something that they live 3 months. And she wound up living to her mid-teen years. I think she passed at 15. But in those last few years, so much of this end stage of metabolic problems like we're talking about in Chinese medicine relate to the kidney. And that essence is so strongly tied to the kidney. So as she got older, we saw more and more signs of this depletion of Jing, and it manifested as metabolic disease. And we would test her for Cushing's because she had symptoms of Cushing's, and she would not, nope. And then finally, yep, she had it. Of course, by that time, I was already using every tool I could to keep her from getting there as best I could with mom's help, because getting herbs, there's always struggles for every different individual into what you can and can't do, but we overcame that the best we can. But I literally, that dog's test did not cross the line into Cushing until the 5th test over a period of about 2 years.
Right. And so for the equine listener, or the listeners, you have mentioned that term Jing, Jing. So we just clarify that, as you mentioned, is what mom and dad gave to that general pool of the overall essence of energy that will go again through your lifetime. So I just wanted to clarify that for the listener.
Sure. The way that it was always explained to me is that Jing is a finite volume of super concentrated jet rocket fuel that's sitting there, and so when your body needs energy that's not being met by the foods you eat and the way you live, your body will reach down and tap that energy a little bit harder. Like if you're a horse person and you get up at 4:30 in the morning to clean stalls, and then you go do an 8-hour job, and you come back and lunch and work your horses, and then you clean stalls again, and now it's 10 o'clock and you're eating dinner, and you do that 7 days a week, your Jing is being depleted. Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit more about treating arthritis in dogs? I know that I did a paltry amount of small animal medicine when I first started into Chinese medicine, and I found what you mentioned earlier, skin and arthritic change, to be wildly effective with Chinese medicine. I ended up getting, now I'm not a small animal practitioner, I've already said that, but toward the end of my little 20% of the week spent in dogs, I was getting vets that I'd never heard of referring me their derm cases because Chinese medicine was having such a great effect. And maybe you could kind of tell the listeners a little bit about how your practice, what that looks like. Like they make an appointment for arthritis or Cushing's or skin or whatever. And, how many visits? I know that depends animal to animal, but, what exactly does that look like? Obviously, the dog's got to come into the clinic to be treated. But herbs, food.
Well, and for us, there's so much of, absolutely. And so much of what we do is I always tell people when you start wanting to incorporate Chinese medicine as a treatment tool, you're embarking on a journey. So, you have a surgery, it's a destination. Okay, here's your surgery, you're done. But when we start talking about using Chinese medicine in the treatment of a chronic disease, we're embarking on a journey. So I don't usually give people a finite number of treatments, but the way it's set up, I want everyone to understand what we're getting into. So we have a consultation and there's no treatment on that day. And your pet has to come with you because I want to look at your pet's vitality. I want to see the severity of what your pet has going on. I want to talk to you about the diagnostics that have been done. And I want to make sure that the proper diagnostics have been done. So for instance, in dogs, we worry about bony tumors that look a lot like arthritis and they're not arthritis, and that'll impact how I treat them even with needles. So I want to ensure that there's been a good diagnosis done if that's something we can do.
Yep.
Right. And so we talk about that. We lay out a plan. For me in my practice, with the pace at which we practice, generally you have your consult, you're going to have a first acupuncture appointment, and you're going to have an acupuncture appointment a week for 3 treatments. And then 2 weeks later, you're going to have another one. 2 weeks after that, another one. And then we're going to spread those out some. Now, and that we can do because, as you pointed out, Allison, we're going to use acupuncture, dry needle acupuncture, aquapuncture, electroacupuncture. We're going to use Chinese herbals and food therapy and teach you some Tuina to do at home. And also we have the ability to have laser, and Dr. Jackie Olson is a manipulator, so we can incorporate all of those tools into addressing your pet's complaint.
On that first visit, Greg, I remember many times looking or watching you do cases at the Chi. And that first visit, there's 10, 15 minutes that you would spend in inquiry, asking questions over and over to try and bring out as much information as possible to get a good start.
Absolutely. And classically in Chinese medicine, we talk about the 10 questions, which is where you ask, how's the energy? How's the appetite? Is there any vomiting or diarrhea? And all those things come out, but then you're pulling threads, right? Well, she does drink a little bit more. Okay, great. Is she drinking a lot more at one time or small amounts frequently? Is she having a hard time getting to the bowl? Oh, you're coughing. Are you coughing more at night? Are you coughing more during the day? And while those things can have an impact not only on a Chinese diagnosis, it can also have a good impact on a conventional diagnosis. If you're coughing more at night and you're a dog, I'm going to be more worried about your heart. So we want to check those things out, right? And so there is a lot of asking. And I prefer owners we allow drop-off appointments for many things at our practice to facilitate, the busy schedules of owners. But acupuncture is one of those where I don't. I want to see the owner's face. I want to hear what they say. I want them to watch what's being done. And and inevitably, as we're doing through those phases, there's stuff there's information that becomes available. And also, when owners breathe deeply in the room and they're touching their dog, the animals go, "Oh, it must be okay, Mom, let's do this." Right? It just makes things go much smoother. So, and classically, I'm going to acupuncture big dogs on the floor with Mom and Dad petting their heads, sitting in a chair, or we're going to do it on a table with Mom and Dad sitting on the other side, petting their heads, and I'll put the needles in. We'll do what we have to do after our discussion and a good and thorough physical exam, which includes tongue and pulse. And then we're going to talk about the herbs you're going to go home on, or what kind of diets we're going to use. And you've touched on food therapy, John, and I would say that I have a lot of clients that don't want to be on a totally home cooked diet, but the vast majority of my clients, I can go, okay, I want you to get a pot, and I want you to put 6 carrots and an ounce of barley and 2 pounds of turkey and blah, blah, blah. And I want you to add a tablespoon of that to their diet every day, twice a day. And most people will do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you use that term journey, which I think is wonderful. I have another one that I use when I get started with a case, and I say, well, Dr. Shea would always say, how are we going to do this, this, and this? And he would say, well, that depends. I use the word dance. I say, let's dance. Okay, we'll take a step forward together. And if we need to come back, we'll take a step back. If we need to kind of take bigger steps, we'll take bigger steps. So that's my word for journey, is to dance.
Now, just to be clear, there has to be agreements. And that's why I like to start with a consultation, because actually this is probably one of the most impressive things about my first visit with Patrick that I took away, and it altered the way I practice ever since. And that is, as he started to treat me after we made the decision that he was going to treat me, and he made a diagnosis, and I'm laying there and he's starting to put some needles in, but he put his hand on my shoulders. I'm laying on the bed to be treated, the treatment table. And he looked at me and says, he says, I'm convinced that I can help you. He says, but in 30 days, if you're not significantly better, then either I'm not the man to treat you, or this is not the medicine you need. And I'm like, wow, a guarantee. I've never had a guarantee, And so I think that that's part of what comes out of that consultation, is telling clients what they need to expect. Is it going to hurt, or how many times? It's not so much when do we finish acupuncture or Chinese medicine, but how many treatments before you should expect to see a change. And that depends on, like you were saying about a dance, that depends on the condition, right? So, for instance, if a skin case is there, I tell the owners, I would expect to see that this may be a problem, especially if it's allergies. There's an old adage in Chinese medicine that you treat allergies this year to make them better next year. And so I tell clients that I expect to see an improvement with this herbal formula and this acupuncture. in about 2 weeks. And I have about an 80% success rate of getting skin cases dramatically better with Chinese medicine and acupuncture and food therapy. By the same token, if you're a dog that has an intervertebral disc problems, I tell these owners it's 6 to 8 treatments before we may be able to assess whether we think we're seeing improvements. Now, thankfully, it may be more like 3 or 4, but the deeper the problem is, the more treatments it takes to affect the change. Sure. But with those arthritis cases, it takes about 90% of those guys coming with arthritis or degenerative joint diseases are going to be improved with acupuncture nerves. 90%. That's a good bit.
That's huge.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and I think you touched on a couple of cool things. You know, you don't know with any medicine until you try. And so you have to try, and then the patient's response is really what gives you the prognosis. You can have sort of the law of averages, but every horse or dog is going to be an individual. And it's my experience that horses tend to come to us a little less broken because they are, we use them for sport. So I think that in general, and I would love you guys' input on this, but I think in general, they come to us because their owners have noticed a fall off on their performance. Whereas, dogs' performance, there certainly are performance animals, but the vast majority of dogs are pets. So a lot of times, at least my experience in my limited practice was that by the time they came to me, I would think, man, if I could have seen this dog 3 years ago, number one, I could have fixed a whole lot more. But number two, it's going to take more treatments to get them rebalanced than it is sometimes our equine patients. And my very humble bias is that horses get to live outside, just like we talked about in the very beginning. I think there's a beautiful soul settling, balancing thing of us being in touch with the earth on a regular basis. And our dog companions don't get quite as much of that as the horses do.
I agree. Although I would say, because I take that even a little bit further. So I've treated a lot of agility and performance animals, and I would tell you that, when they're not right, their owners know right away and they're in the office. Right. Hey, something's off. And sometimes that's been a simple thing. And sometimes you're at the beginnings of their performance is off, but it's not a musculoskeletal issue. All of a sudden you find out that there's an endocrine problem or it's looming on the horizon, right? Sure. So I totally agree with that. Well, they find it earlier. So before that's actually even a fulminating problem, you have an opportunity to fix it. So you don't even have to give it a name other than a pattern, right? I think you've got some chi and blood stagnation in your shoulder, but your liver chi's pretty stuck and your spleen is going down. Let's fix that, right? And by doing that, we keep everything where it needs to be. I always think that horses live in their bodies and dogs live in their minds.
I love that. That's well said.
So I think dogs hide things from us more. Horses are trying to tell us, hey, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. And dogs are like, I'll suck it up because mom or dad wants me to. I'm fine. Until they're not.
Greg, where do the cats live? I'd like to know about that.
Believe it or not, cats are pretty amazing. They are not. The old adage about dogs have masters and cats have staff is absolutely true. But I have seen cats that will absolutely go to their parents. Like, for instance, I have had some cats that have a urinary issue, but it's not fulminating yet, and they'll just go and look at they'll be walking around and mom and dad will go, well, they're not quite right, but they're not sick enough to bring to the doctor. And all of a sudden they'll look at him and go, hey, look at this. And they'll pee right on the floor, right in front of them.
For sure.
And they're like, oh. And I think the funniest story on that I ever had about how owners and cats and it's a cat story, but it's about owners and their pet parents and their babies, or owners and their dogs and cats. And I had a client for many years, and she had a beautiful cat, a beautiful Burmese cat. And this cat was the center of her universe. Mm. And she showed up at my clinic one day and she said, my cat's not right. And I'm like, okay, why do you think that? And she goes, because every morning I wake up and I go into the bathroom and I have my morning constitutional, and the cat comes in and does the same thing. And this morning she didn't. And the cat wound up having, she had bile stones.
Oh, wow.
She had actually occluded her bile duct. And we found it on an ultrasound because we quickly did blood work and, your liver values are up. Oh, let's do an abdominal ultrasound. Oh my God, look at that. But you wouldn't have known it otherwise. Cat was still eating, drinking, doing all the things that you would say, oh, you're fine, and no abdominal pain. And now when you did her pulse was wiry, which means stagnation, but that was kind of the cat that she was,
Sure.
So yeah. So those bonds are really important.
Oh, no, I agree. I've heard, dog energy described as a little more attached to their humans, and cat energy as being very unattached, and horses as somewhere in the middle. So I was not really being a smart aleck, but when you said that, I was like, well, truly, if horses are in the middle, then then where are the cats falling off?
Yeah.
Because I think
for sure.
that horses
and I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think cats, for the most part, my experience has been like, for instance, there are dogs who love everybody in the family and they're everybody's dog. That's not common for cats.
Right.
Cats seem to adopt one person that they might be close to, and even that comes with conditions. And even that applies to us as practitioners in treating cats and dogs, because I always tell my clients, with a dog, I issue an order. We're going to do this. With a cat, I make agreements. Okay, you'll let me do this if I don't go here and I only go there. And okay, I got it. So it's interesting.
For sure. Well, Greg, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and experience. What a wonderful time we had today with Greg. Don't you think, John? I think that was a great interview.
It was outstanding. I've enjoyed every minute of it. And again, we could go on for another hour or two. But
sure.
So all good for me.
For sure. Dr. Greg Todd is in semi-retirement from the Animal Hospital of Dunedin, but you could find him there. I think there'll be a link for him in the show notes. And as far as John and I go, we always say to find us at Chi University. And really what you all need to do if you're looking for a practitioner of TCVM is to go to tcvm.com. And on that website, and that's T as in tiger, C as in Charlie, V as in Victor, and M as in mother. On that website, you can find a practitioner near me, and that will link you to both small animal practitioners and equine practitioners. So you can try and find somebody close to you. And we've gotten some feedback of people having a hard time finding a TCVM practitioner. And the more you request it, the more likely your local veterinarians will come to the Chi University and get some training in this amazing medicine. So my quote for the day, since we have a dog day today with Greg, was, learn a lesson from your dog. No matter what life brings you, kick some grass over that poo and move on.